Whether you have roots in New York City, or whether you come into New York City by choice, it's a place that's a beacon. It's a place where you challenge yourself. It's a place of so much culture that you're drawn to it.
New York will come back and be built a little bit like the phoenix. It'll rise from its ashes. And it'll give New York a certain chance to I won't say start over, but to recreate itself as an even better place.
I love that. I say that a lot, and you sometimes get looks from people, but I have to believe that that's what's going to happen, that New York will become something else.
When Citizens was founded, New York City was mired in one of the worst financial crises in its history. And that now famous advertisement that our founder, Oz Elliott, placed in the New York Times produced over 10,000 caring neighbors. Everyone pitched in as city services were slashed, and that's the proud beginning of this organization.
Today, we're in the midst of crisis, and we need to step up. And we've seen it before, that when average, everyday New Yorkers come together, they can make amazing things happen. They can create places that have been left behind. They can bring them forward.
40 years ago, New York City was on the verge of bankruptcy. The New York Times, writing about that period not long ago, said that the difference between solvency and insolvency was paper thin. New York is very different today, arguably the most diverse and interesting city in the world. We don't claim credit for that transformation, but we do proudly claim credit for being there in 1975 when things were so difficult for the city.
New Yorkers are the toughest people in the world. So when I hear folks say that New York is dead, New York is over, cities persist, and New York is the greatest city in the world. So that is not the truth.
New York City is said to be a metropolis, forever chasing progress and perfection, but it is lately best at making do with the reality of considerably less.
All In for New York City says it all. We are going to do everything that we can to make sure that the greatest city in the world always wins and continues to win, and that everybody gets to celebrate in that victory. Hello. Good afternoon. This is Dr. Rasan Harris from Citizens Committee for New York City. We are so thrilled that you are joining us today for our conversation about civic engagement, about getting involved, practicing democracy, and having a voice in making sure that New York City is the city, the place that you want to be in and that you have of ownership stake of. Today, we're really excited to have some candidates, and we wanted to bring the candidates up in general so you can see them. They're going to be part of a conversation that's going to take place very soon. So excited that Art Chang, that Maya Wiley, that Diane Morales found it not robbery to join us and to share with you their thoughts about democracy, civic engagement, and the future of New York City. But before we get into that very exciting conversation, I'm going to talk to Laura Wood about the larger context of elections in New York City, how folks get involved and how they vote, and what you should be thinking of and looking for in the coming months as we approach primary season, which I believe is in June. And Laura can correct me if I'm wrong. And then the later vote that's happening. The national election just happened. And we had inauguration of our president, Joe Biden, and our vice president, Kamala Harris. And now it's time for us to really think local and to get ready to get to work. So I'm about to ask Laura one question, but for those of you who might not be initiated, Citizens Committee is one of America's oldest micro-granting institutions. What does that mean in English? That means that we provide support for average, everyday New Yorkers that decide to come together to be part of a collective process to improve their neighborhoods. You have a great idea, you apply to us in a group, and we can give you a grant and hopefully allow you to join up with other New Yorkers so that we can make New York City great and even greater than she ever has been before, after the pandemic and after all we're going through. So part of the process is being involved in the political process, and we're so excited to have Laura Wood from Democracy NYC, and would love for her to introduce herself and tell us what Democracy NYC's goal is.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Harris, and to the entire Citizens Committee for organizing this critically important discussion today. It really couldn't come at a better time the day after what we finally witnessed yesterday, which was the peaceful transfer of power, which we know took a lot of effort, and is something that we now know we can never take for granted. But anyway, my name is Laura Wood, as Dr. Harris said, and I am the Senior Advisor and General Counsel to the Democracy NYC Initiative, which is a New York City initiative focused on increasing voter registration, voter participation, and civic engagement more generally. And, you know, we, in the last couple of years, and in particular last year, which was obviously historic on so many levels, we have been at the forefront working with various partners to engage voters, convene community partners across the city, to make sure that every New Yorker has the opportunity to make their voice heard.
That's excellent. So I heard there are some changes happening in the electoral process and how we vote. So can you first and foremost tell me what's changing? And then secondly, if hearing it from you in 2 minutes isn't enough, where folks can get training and go deeper into learning how to educate themselves about those changes.
Absolutely. Yes, as you mentioned earlier, there is a primary coming up in June, and I'm so glad that there are so many great candidates running for lots of different offices in that primary, including mayor, of course. And even before that, there are 4 special elections coming up, with the first one actually starting on Saturday, with the first day of early voting. And what makes these upcoming municipal special elections and primaries so important is that, first of all, they will determine, who leads our city for the next several years, but also because they feature this new way of voting for New York City elections. And that is called ranked choice voting. And so I think—
I'm going to pause. Ranked choice voting.
Ranked choice voting, correct. And really the concept is simple, but making sure that voters actually have the necessary information going into the voting booth or filling out their absentee ballot or however they choose to vote is really going to be critically important, and is one of our core missions for the next 5 months. Essentially what it means is that instead of just voting for one candidate, voters can actually rank their top 5 choices. So as we know, as we mentioned, there are several candidates running for lots of different offices. In this first special election, which is to fill a vacant city council seat in Queens, there are 8 candidates on the ballot. And so voters will be able to select their top 5 and rank them in their order of preference. And what it will mean is that in order to win, the candidate actually has to get the majority of the votes. And I'm happy to walk through a bit more about how that works. But there are a number of really great resources to answer your question, Dr. Harris, and maybe I can once I'm done talking, I could post some of them.
No, that'd be great. You know, we're on Facebook Live and on YouTube Live. Actually, if you mention some of them now, I think some folks who are in the audience might even be able to find them and post them. And then also we'll make sure that we send some of those resources and follow-up emails.
Absolutely. Terrific. And I think at least some of my colleagues are watching, so maybe they can help out with that. But the city's campaign finance board is the agency that's actually mandated under city law to do outreach and education about ranked choice voting. And they've already put together a number of very helpful resources. The City Board of Elections, which is the agency that actually administers the elections in New York, also has some information on their website. So I think those are both good places to start. And then for folks who are interested in helping us spread the word, Democracy NYC is doing a number of things. We are, first of all, doing phone banking to voters in the districts that have these special elections. And we are always looking for volunteers to help. So we can include some of that information as well in case people are looking for easy volunteer opportunities. So yeah, those are all good places to start.
No, that's excellent. They're definitely government-specific resources that hopefully are educating the populace, the average person, how to get involved. But also, that is good to know that they're nonprofit organizations that are trying to mobilize people to exercise their right to have a voice in voting. So I have one broad question. You know, why is it important for folks to vote? And then my second question is more specific. How can average organizations and average folks engage with Democracy NYC to be helpful in this moment?
Those are two excellent questions. And you know, the first one is really critically important to address again in these next few months as we gear up for these very important municipal elections. You know, historically, we see much higher voter turnout in presidential years. And in fact, despite the fact that New York City was the epicenter of the pandemic, we actually just saw record turnout in the city. And despite the fact that New York is, you know, not really a player when it comes to the Electoral College, it was really, you know, amazingly gratifying to see the turnout. And I mean, people waited in line for hours to vote early, which is problematic in some ways, but also just really speaks to the fact that there was such an interest in participating. In my view, you know, one of our big challenges is to really try to explain how critically important these municipal offices are, you know, whether it's city council, city comptroller, public advocate, and of course, mayor and the borough presidents as well. You know, all of these offices are on the ballot, and these are the people who are going, you know, who should be most responsive to local communities' needs. You know, who do you call if the street light is out, or if the equipment at the playground is broken, or if there's a spike in crime in your community? You know, you don't call the president of the United States, you call your council member or maybe your borough president. And we need to ensure that more New Yorkers are involved in deciding who those people are. And frankly, you know, in my view, we also need more people to run for those offices so that we have, you know, so that we have elected officials who really reflect what New York looks like, and can best represent our interests. And that's why I'm so glad that there are so many great candidates running for these offices. And that kind of dovetails into your second question, which is how can community groups get involved with Democracy NYC? I already mentioned the volunteer opportunities. So we're always looking for partners in helping us get the word out about those opportunities, and then also helping us with the actual phone banking and reaching out to voters, which has become much more challenging in this pandemic, since we're obviously restricted in terms of the type of outreach we can do. And we're always looking for partners to brainstorm about the best tools to develop and the best messages to develop to reach people in local communities. One thing we're actually embarking on right now is what we call a Cbo Listening Tour, where we're going to be reaching out to as many community-based organizations as possible, and really trying to hear from them what their needs are. Is their need language access? Is it, are we focused enough on people with disabilities and making sure that they have access to voting? Are there certain communities that are just being ignored and are not getting the important information about how to register to vote and then actually voting? And
Laura, that is so important. I think that statement, making sure that no community is ignored, is one that I want to make sure resonates and stays with everyone. Can you give your website and make sure that everyone hears it as we go next to the candidates?
Absolutely. I'll ask my colleagues to post our website, and then we also have a couple of there's the New York City Civic Engagement Commission, which has a lot of great resources on their website as well. Yeah, and we can, as this continues, we can continue to post additional resources.
Awesome. And just if you can check, our website is citizensnyc.org. So basically what you see up here, is yours close to democracynyc.org or?
It's a New York City website. So it's actually nyc.gov. And then there's a / Democracy NYC. Here, I'm not sure if everyone can see this if I paste it here, but.
Well, I mean, I think you describing it is great, giving us the breadcrumbs, and we'll make sure it gets up there. And maybe in the magic of post-production, we can make it magically appear. So, Laura, thank you so much. We really appreciate you. And thank you for all you do to make sure that New York City is aware and engaged and gets to vote. Thank you so much. Take care. So we are excited to have 3 candidates for the New York City mayoral race joining us today. As Laura said, there are many races. Anyone getting involved at any level is important, whether it's from district leaders and being representative on your block level, all the way up to running for mayor, which is the highest executive in the city. And we're excited to hear from each of our 3 representatives that are in the race. And we're going to start with Art Chang. All right, so thank you so much for joining us. A simple question, and we'll give you 5 to 7 minutes just to go on it. Talk to me about why you are committed to civic engagement and what are your hopes and dreams for New York City.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. Really, I'm delighted and honored to be here. What a storied history that the Citizens Committee has had. So it's really fantastic that you're stepping up again at this historic time when the city needs you so much. I wanted to also just kind of have a nod to Laura Wood and Democracy NYC. There's a virtuous cycle between voting and making voting better, especially with this current legislature. What we saw in 2018 was, working with the WFP, we were able to elect out the IDC and elect in a whole batch of new legislators who were able to really advance a lot of the innovations that we're seeing in voting today. Things like early voting. We're going to have same-day voter registration soon. We'll have other things that will make voting much, much easier. So, and as Laura mentioned, the local elections really are the place where things matter on your day-to-day basis. Going back to something that Dr. Harris said in the video, I'm all in for New York City, alongside the Citizens Committee for New York City. Our city right now isn't working for everyone because it was designed to only work for a few. Our city needs to work for everyone. We need to rebuild it from the bottom up. We need to think about this and redesign it. On 9/11, my infant son Ben was in childcare at the World Trade Center. I was at work in Midtown. I saw on TV the first plane hit the first building. I knew right away that Ben was going to be safe because he was under the care of Karen and Onika, his childcare teachers. Hours later, when I found Ben, that came true. I want every family to feel like their children are being properly cared for and safe. That's why I believe in building a universal and comprehensive universal childcare system. I was born in Jim Crow Atlanta and grew up in an all-white school district in Akron, Ohio. I know what it's like to feel unsafe on the street. I know what it's like to come home and wonder if my mother is going to be alive. I also know what it feels like to fear the police as much as I wanted their help. Every family and every community in New York City deserves to feel safe. That's why I have a plan to transform the police and hold them accountable. I moved to New York City in 1985. I struggled a lot. I eventually did better, started a business, made a bunch of mistakes, lost everything, and then returned to struggling. There were many, many years when I didn't know how I was going to pay the rent. Today, there are hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers who feel the same way. We must make people feel safe in their homes. That's why I have a COVID-19 response plan to end evictions and cancel debt for renters, landlords, and businesses. For 30 years, I've been working to make the impossible possible in New York City. At Queens West, I learned how to build the city from the sewers to the streets, to deliver universal broadband, and to prepare the city for climate crises ahead. Notably, Queens West was one of 2 waterfront properties in the city that did not lose power during Hurricane Sandy. From CUNY, the Brooklyn Public Library, and Brooklyn Tech, I learned that we can deliver a quality education that meets every student where they are. At Safe Horizon and Case Commons, I learned how to deliver integrated and coordinated vital government services. As a co-creator of NYC Votes, as the second Asian to be appointed to the Campaign Finance Board and the first chair of its Voter Assistance Advisory Committee, I know how to strengthen democracy for our city. As a technologist, I know how to build from the bottoms up. I know how to create systems that are user-friendly and transparent for all New Yorkers. And I've been a 30-year Brooklyn resident. I moved here to Fort Greene because I really wanted to be near Spike Lee and hip hop. I've been in Prospect Heights for the past 25 years. I raised a family. My kids went to school here. I built a home here. Brooklyn is my home, and New York is my home. Let me talk about my platform. My platform is to redesign the city. It's comprehensive, bold, and most importantly, possible. It focuses on 7 core issues. First, universal childcare for healthy families. Second, truly affordable housing. Third, small business growth as the engine of economic growth. Fourth, public safety for all. Fifth, every education that meets every student where they are. Sixth, a reinvigorated arts and entertainment sector. And 7, adapting to the climate crisis, which is here today. I love this quote from Albert Einstein. He said, "We cannot solve today's problems with the same thinking used to create them. I bring different thinking, a way to make the impossible possible, and I promise that I'll bring that when I come to work every day as your mayor." Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for those words. We look forward to having you in conversation and dialogue. Those who are joining us via Facebook Live and YouTube Live, have your questions, put them in the chat so that we can make sure that we get them. Next, I'd love to bring to the stage Maya Wiley. Hi, Maya.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we're unmuted. Now the magic's going to happen. Same questions. Number one, talk to me about the importance of civic engagement and talk to me about the future of New York City.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the work all of you do. Because as we celebrated an inauguration yesterday that was historic, part of what we were celebrating is the fact that we could breathe easier because we might have an accountable democracy, one that is representative, as we saw with the historic swearing in of Vice President Kamala Harris. But I'm running because at a time of such historic crisis, but also that even President Biden reiterated over and over again yesterday, where we had problems before that led us to this crisis. We had problems of racial division, of inequality, both income and wealth gaps. We have had so many problems that are part of why we are so divided. And I say that because I started thinking about running to be the next mayor of New York City before COVID hit, because before it hit, we already knew we had all these problems that we had not solved. And I say that as someone who, as a young girl, went to a Black, overcrowded, underfunded, segregated school. And despite the high level of education of both my parents, being in second grade at the top of my class in 2 years behind grade level. And nobody asked us what our school needed. Nobody asked our teachers what they needed. And they went on strike one year. One year I had 6 teachers in 1 year because of teacher strikes, because no one was asking them what they needed. And I also say that because I also watched my neighbors disappear from my Black neighborhood, including my best friend Charlene, who was my best friend in that classroom and in the streets. And her mama worked at the grocery store down the block, was lucky to have a job, except that job did not pay the rent when it increased. And like most of us in our neighborhood, we rented, we did not own. And I just watched her disappear one day. And my mother had to explain to me what happened. And I did not know the word gentrification, but I certainly was traumatized by it as a child. Now, I came to New York City after experiences like that to become a civil rights lawyer, with the singular goal of walking in the footsteps of the great Thurgood Marshall and doing it in a city that felt so much to me like home. One, because it was. I lived in New York City as a baby on the Lower East Side in a Mitchell-Lama apartment, but because it was a place that had all of us. And New York City did, with all its problems, of which segregation, high unemployment, too many problems to describe, that we still had everyone. Descendants of North American slaves, immigrants from all over the world, 40% of our people from other countries. We have people with big bank accounts and no bank account at all. People who live in public housing and luxury housing. The question was how we were going to make it fair and more just. And I spent 25 years doing that. But the way I did it really speaks to democracy, because part of civil rights work, part of racial justice work, and what I did from the ACLU to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, to going, yes, into federal government, the U.S. Attorney's Office on the civil side to do civil rights enforcement, and finally going to a foundation and doing grant making like Rasan, which is how we met, and also doing it by founding the Center for Social Inclusion, a policy advocacy organization whose mission was to dismantle structural racism. That in every single one of those jobs, I was charged by myself, by my morals, by the way my parents raised me as activists in the civil rights movement, that it requires us being in partnership, listening, learning, building, creating, innovating together what the priorities and problems are that we must solve so that we all have dignity. Because not having a school that works for us is not dignity. Being displaced from our communities because we can't afford the rent is not dignity. Being unable to afford a home is not dignity. And yet, I went into city government because after that 25 years of experience and working directly with community leaders, with community experts, because that's the way I think of community. That's the way I was raised to think about it. As from a father who founded the National Welfare Rights Organization, putting Black women at the helm, who were also welfare recipients. That for me, that was actually democratic practice, because it is the ballot box, yes, because we have to have a say in who leads us, but it's also fundamental to democracy, is a problem-solving country, society, city, where we come together, neighborhoods, to solve our problems. So when I went into city government, it was because that's the level of government that touches everyone's lives and touches all these things we're talking about and we'll talk about. And what I was able to do, and I'm gratified that I went in, spent 2.5 years there working on women and minority-owned business contracts and getting it up from 500 million to 1.6 billion in 1 year, despite the fact that the city had no program in place, no staffing in place, and had never done anything like that before. But the reason I was able to do it is I partnered with agencies, but I also partnered with people who were women, people of color, who had businesses, to ask them what was working and what wasn't. Universal broadband access. I show government how it could do something none of us knew how to do, including me. When I came into the de Blasio administration, not knowing the man, but on mission to end income inequality, he said, universal broadband, that's you. And I said, great. I have no idea how to do that. Because if we're doing things that are transformational, we don't know how. We have to figure it out together. So I pulled together a task force that had everyone at it, from the Red Hook Initiative and Red Hook houses, that figured out how to put up, with no help from anybody, a wireless corridor that young people in Red Hook houses helped build.
So Maya, thank you so much for telling us how to come together and to partner. I'm so excited. I hope folks who are in the in this chat come up with questions in particular, because you brought some specific issues about coming together and some problems that are across different neighborhoods in New York City. So let's see. Hopefully folks will have some specific questions about that. But we look forward to talking to you a little bit more in the Q&A. Y ahora, bienvenidos a Diane Morales.
Muchas
so
gracias.
Happy.
Muchas gracias.
So the same set of questions. Why civic engagement? And we'll talk about the future of New York City. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Rasan and Citizens Committee, for creating this space for this conversation. I really appreciate it. You know, I want to make note of, it is not insignificant that we are having this conversation the day after the inauguration and in the wake of, you know, such unrest and crisis and tension in this country. And I have to say, you know, I've been struggling as much as I breathed a sigh of relief yesterday, that I think we all did. I've been struggling because I can't quite unsee the images of our Black and brown and Asian and immigrant workers on their knees, hunched over, sweeping up after the insurrection, sweeping up the literal and the figurative trash that white supremacy left behind in the halls of our Capitol. And the fact that that happened not just that day, but has been happening for hundreds of years. You know, I've had over 25 years of experience meeting the needs of some of New York City's most needy residents and our neighbors when our systems have failed. I am also from here. I taught public school here. I raised my family here, and I have been organizing right here in this city. Throughout all of this, I have had the experience of multiple failed systems, but also the hope of our communities. And that combination is what led me to enter this race. I'm running for mayor because thoughts, prayers, and rhetoric alone will not create fairness, justice, and equity for all. And neither will selling our city to Wall Street or our neighborhoods to big developers and placing our bodies and our liberties in the hands of the police department that continue to violate Black and brown people as recently as on MLK Day earlier this week. My career has actually centered those all along, has centered those whose so-called democracy has always left behind, even though we've all benefited from their work. As recently as last night, I sat around the fire with the Teamsters from Local 202 in the South Bronx. Those are the very people who helped make it possible for New Yorkers to be fed throughout the height of the pandemic. Not that the pandemic is over. As a nonprofit executive, I responded to the educational, to the economic, to the housing, and generational trauma because bureaucrats in this city, billionaires and millionaires, have continued to enrich themselves on the backs of the poor. I haven't conducted studies, I haven't written research papers, or sat and opined on the state of affairs. I've listened to those closest to the problems, and I've carefully budgeted and allocated what are always scarce resources to create the space for communities left behind to lead. I didn't leave the city during the pandemic, and I don't say that as a dig. I know that's become kind of a thing. I say that as a reflection of my center. And my center was at that point in time getting involved in organizing with Bed-Stuy Strong to support my community. I got to watch during that process newly unemployed artists reinvent their skills to help make ends meet, wage earners coming to pick up food from mutual aid centers. The problem here is not money, because I think our city has resources. The problem is our priorities, how administration after administration is out of touch with our communities and has continued to fail to address the root causes of the barriers, excuse me, to a dignified life. And the answer to this is not just to throw money at the fire or to build around it. We actually need a whole new paradigm for how we lead moving forward, one that will prioritize communities that are most in need, one that will stabilize the livelihoods of our neighbors, especially our essential workers, our frontline workers, and small business owners, and one that will radicalize our approach to addressing the needs of the majority of New Yorkers. We are at a crossroads in the history of our city, and it is important for us to center and elevate the voices of those that have been historically left behind. I'm really looking forward to having the opportunity to share my vision for the city that is inspired by the people, with the people, and for the people. I'm not looking to get us back to the status quo. I'm running for mayor because I believe in the possibility of creating an equitable city that we have yet to experience, but we all deserve. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Diane. We're going to bring Art and Maya back for a conversation. Just to let everyone know for the flow, I'm going to ask one question that I'm going to moderate, and then I'm going to let Paige Travis come in with questions that we've collected from our community to let you know. So I'm going to ask one question that hopefully encapsulates everything that we've discussed. It's about civic engagement, and it's about accountability, and it's about the process that we have, which is, elections to put people into elected office. So we're going to start with Art and then go through the same order we went before we go to Paige. But the question is quite simply, how is civic engagement a tool for holding local elected officials accountable, and also just holding community institutions accountable to average everyday New Yorkers? So Art, if you can go first.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Harris. I want to start with us remembering back to the protests from May and remembering what that was like. They weren't led by by significant leaders. They weren't really pre-planned. They were more of an organic outpouring of protest for George Floyd, but for all the others who really suffered at the hands of the police. But it was actually more than that. It was actually kind of a cry of despair about where the city was at. In addition, with COVID and the economic crisis, it's clear to me that the city actually needs a different way to respond. That when you have a leader-full kind of protest, where leaders are present everywhere across the city, the big question becomes how the city is going to deal with it. And you contrast that with really the vaccine distribution today. And those two things seem very disparate and very disconnected. But the fact is that the city has a tremendous amount of information about where people are, about what's happening in communities, about the crises that afflict communities. CompStat, for instance, is something which should look at crime not just as something that the police need to respond to, but actually as a signal for communities in crisis. I believe that there's a mandate to actually use data to create transparency, to enable the communities to really interact with the inner workings of government, to understand how policies are being created, and then how they can actually see what the proposal is that's going to happen, what the vision is for success, and then be able to measure it as it goes along in full transparency.
No, thank you for that. Talk to me about civic engagement and accountability. What are the tools, and what do you think is possible, and what do you think is the ideal for us in New York City?
So much more is possible than what we have now. We have communities all over the city, so many, who are doing so much with so little, and getting so little acknowledgement or partnership from city government. I believe that in order to lead accountably, you have to listen and learn and lead in partnership. And let me give you an example of what that means. So on our campaign, we're already doing that, right? So we have people's assemblies. And in people's assemblies, we have two kinds. Some are broad and open. So anyone who wants to across the city can come together and share what the priorities, the problems, and the ideas and innovations for solving them are. And that actually informs our platform. And we share it back with participants, and you don't have to endorse me as a candidate to participate. And that's extremely important to me as someone who's going to be the next mayor, and as something that is a model for also how the government engages differently. And one of the things that did for us in terms of accountability is we started hearing from folks, gun violence is an urgent problem, and we are not hearing or experiencing anyone responding with sufficient urgency. And so we did, and it became the first policy proposal we put out as a result of listening and learning. And we did it in consultation. We did it with folks who were directly impacted, including a friend who lost his nephew in Bed-Stuy to gun violence. And what we heard, we incorporated into the policy proposal. And let me just tell you one plank that goes exactly to your point about accountability and being responsive. And that's that we create a participatory justice fund. $18 million for communities that have problems with high rates of gun violence to say what they need, what programs are working in their communities they want to be better resourced, where the gaps are, and what helps fill those gaps, so that they are actually directing resources to the problem. And so that it's like a participatory budget model. But it's also one that shows a reflection of what people are asking for that will solve their problems. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful. Diane, civic engagement, accountability, community. Go.
Let's do it. So the first thing I'll say to that is, right, there's a lot of different levers for engagement, from the very, very local level, community boards, school boards, that kind of thing, to voting, to protesting even. I think that, one of the things that I think about when I talk about sort of the need for us to undertake structural and systemic reform, think about the accessibility of those sort of levers for participation and engagement, who, traditionally, those things are not always as open to everyone as they should be and could be. I think about, alternative mechanisms for engaging with community. For me, over the course of the last year, the work that I've done with Bed-Stuy Strong has been one of the most critical ways to really be on the ground and really connect with community members and really understand what the needs were, and what the solutions are, right? Because I'm a big believer that those who are closest to the challenges are closest to the solutions. And I think we need to expand opportunities for folks to engage and to be heard in ways that are meaningful and accessible to them. We need to bring this process into the community rather than saying there's X, Y, and Z, and you need to figure it out. You need to find it. You need to, get engaged somehow. We need to, I think government as someone that is, as leadership that is supposed to be reflective of the needs and desires of the community, it is also on us to find alternative ways to connect with the community. And it is particularly in the age of COVID, it is not true that we all have the technology or the infrastructure to get on these Zoom calls and hear about what our candidates for office are thinking and feeling. So it's really important for us to find different ways. And in terms of accountability, I think it's the other side of that coin, right? We need to find other ways to give communities voice in giving us feedback and holding us accountable that go outside of some of these structures, right? Part of that means pounding the pavement and getting out into the community. And yes, convening different, spaces where people get to provide that feedback. But we also have to go to where the people are, because for too long, most people in New York City have not felt seen or reflected or represented in our leadership. And that's why we have voter turnout rates that we do. And we need to change that. We need to transform that. And the way to do that is to bring it to the people in a whole different kind of way. And that's what I believe.
Thank you for that. The three of you have invoked community so much, and that's at the heart of what Citizens Committees does. And so it gives me so much life just to hear this critical conversation. So I thank you so much. I'll do a little commercial as we go to the question and answer. Community needs great information. Community needs access to resources. Community needs to know that they're not alone. And Citizens Committee, through our grant process, again, you do not have to be a 501c3 to get access to one of our grants. You just need to be a group of folks who are coming together. We try to provide resources. We try to provide access to social capital. If you've gotten a grant of ours, or even if not, you get on our mailing list to get access to resources. And then trying to create forums where conversations can go to scale. I think this is one of those examples, and the questions that you're going to get that Paige is bringing up come from a lot of our grantee partners. So we're really excited for you just being accessible to community and being in the moment, because being seen and being represented is not something that's taken for granted. So thank you so much. So as we call Paige to the stage, and as I drop back, she will get to the questions and answers.
Thank you, Rasan. Yes, thank you all for your introductions and also just for taking time to be with us today. As Rasan mentioned, we've collected questions from our grantee network from across all 5 boroughs. So we'll start with one that focuses on education. Access to quality education is an important issue identified by our community network, especially during COVID. So what are New Yorkers' roles in advocating for this? And what is the role of elected officials? How do community members bring up their concerns, and how do elected officials implement those community needs? We can start with you, Art.
It's a great question. I mean, the first place where I would like to start is actually, what does success mean in education? One of the things that Diane actually has brought out in the previous conversation is the fact that we have an education model that is 100 years old, and it hasn't really been rethought. Isn't this a great opportunity to do that? What does it really mean? shouldn't we have a system that actually adapts to our students where they are, meets every student where they are? And especially at a time like this, when so many students are facing homelessness, where so many students are actually not learning, where teachers and parents are all struggling with this, and parents balancing this work-life trade-off, where especially for women, so many women are picking kids over their work. It is really a multi-layered, complex issue. We need every stakeholder at the table. And I'm going to refer back to Diane. She said a wonderful thing, which is that not everybody has Zoom, that we actually need universal broadband to level the playing field at the very beginning across the city. You know, Maya's done some amazing work in this area, and I've actually know how to build universal broadband because I've actually worked on it. So we can actually do this. We can make this much better. There are ways that we can do it. And when I was on the SLT for Brooklyn Tech, preparing for this remote learning and listening to the teachers and their ideas for it, there are amazing ideas for innovation and adapting and adaptability. We need every stakeholder at the table. We need all the ideas to be put out there, and we need a way for the communities to really engage with these issues.
Great, great. Diane or Maya, feel free to chime in.
I mean, so I'll jump in. I think the first sort of thought that I have in response to that question, right, is that we're the most segregated education system in the country, and not just segregated, but separate and unequal. And so I think it's critical that we tackle that issue first, right, in terms of providing equal resources to our schools, no matter what community they're located in. And then just to wrap it up really quickly, I think thank you, Art, for invoking my my reference to I think our classrooms still look like Little House on the Prairie. And I think that we should be thinking about, transforming what we teach and how we teach it. I talk a lot about digital and technological literacy, civic and democratic literacy, and financial literacy. And I think any subject that we teach right now could be taught under the umbrella of any of those. And also the idea of incorporating the city as a classroom, which would include bringing in partnerships with arts and cultural institutions, businesses, corporations, et cetera, so that our young people are also being exposed to career opportunities and having access to, as they get older, job shadowing and internships and those kinds of things. I think the role of school should be actually to help our students develop critical thinking skills. And the ability to navigate the world and make informed choices about their future. And you're failing in that miserably. So that's that's kind of my headline top level issues of what I think we need to be looking at and talking about when we talk about schools. I'll give Maya some time.
Thank you. Look, I agree with both Art and Diane. Let me just say, as a parent, between my two kids have cumulatively 15 years in the public school system, navigated our neighborhood elementary school, the middle school admissions process, high school in the city. There are so many things that we have to focus on. But right now in COVID, I would say one, absolutely understanding and identifying the assets that we have in community, in teachers and in administrators, in order to be creative at doing the one thing I've heard parents say across this city, which is, my kid's lost a year. And my kid also is traumatized. And so we have to think about both the ways in which we already have some innovation in little pockets of our school system that we're not pulling forward and utilizing, like P-TECH. P-TECH is actually a program that has shown that even when kids are behind grade level, it doesn't mean they're not excellent, and it also doesn't mean they can't do accelerated learning. And P-TECH is doing that. That's an opportunity we can build on. In terms of technology access, when I was in City Hall, we had our libraries as partners, our 3 library systems, figuring out how we could better boost their ability to be part of the assets, because we have libraries in every community, including underserved and underfunded communities. And, my 5-box lending program was an excellent pilot. We had the opportunity to figure out how to make it permanent. And that's an opportunity we still have to solve some of these issues. But I also want to just say that at a time when even before COVID, we had a resource issue for our public schools, that we have to be in conversation with Albany about the money that is due us. And we also have to be in conversation about how we restructure our public school system to take advantage of some of what we've learned from COVID and the opportunities that vacancy gives us to have smaller class sizes and new kinds of programs that both help us integrate our schools, but also deliver much more innovative programs. And so that's something we have blown up in the box. Let's build a new one.
And just on that same note about opportunities, we have a lot of Block Club associations that are a part of our network. And so, would be interested to know, what is your vision to better utilize our streets in New York City, whether that's while we're still, in the pandemic and thereafter?
Would you like me to start? If you don't mind, I'd actually like to close on a comment that Diane raised about desegregation and what desegregation actually means, because we do have the most segregated school system in the country. Everyone knows this. There's been lots of papers written about it. But the question is, what does desegregation actually mean? And what does integration mean? Does it mean busing Black kids into white neighborhoods or white kids into Black neighborhoods? And what I'm hearing from my communities is that what they want is desegregation based on economic access, that the funding has to be equalized, which is something that Maya mentioned. We have to do this. And where this relates to streets, because streets are actually our public spaces. They are the place where we all get together. They're actually the center point for lots of interconnected things, ranging from the current street side dining that we have. We now have a combined water system that pumps sewage directly into New York Harbor every time there's a big rain. We have pedestrians and bikes and new mini modes of transportation that are all fighting for space. We have the greatest increase in cars that we've had because people don't want to take the subway. The streets are extraordinarily complex. And in order for us to move to a more carbon-free world where people have clean air and they feel safe on their streets, where we can bring the arts and culture back to people, we have to think very, very differently about the streets. I'm very excited about the new proposal to expand Union Square into more of a pedestrian and bike-friendly into plaza and eliminate car traffic from many of the surrounding streets around Union Square. We need to do that. We need to bring that type of innovation across the entire city. And one final note on that small businesses in particular, and restaurants especially, rely upon that street side seating for their survival. When I've talked to restaurant owners, the one thing they said is, if we knew that we could have that street seating through the spring of 2022, we would double down, take out more loans, because we could then see the light at the end of the tunnel. There's never been a better time to really rethink the uses of our streets.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think this is such an important conversation because we need to do more than recover from COVID. It can't just be going back to January 2020 because we had far too many problems and far too little dignity and civic engagement and accountability then. But one of the things that I have proposed, which I'm really excited about, is called New Deal New York. Except what we are going to do is take $10 billion in capital construction spend. We're going to pull forward capital projects that solve community problems, including, and yes, it can include things like transportation options. It can include things like protected bike lanes. It can include things that go into community getting some of the infrastructure it needs and wants. And we'll do that with metrics that are about equity, that are about racial justice and inclusion, that are about communities that have been disinvested in. And we will do it creating 100,000 jobs. 100,000 jobs. And I've tested this with economists. So we are not making up numbers here. And what that will do is do two things. It'll not only help our people get back to work because we're going to have local targeting of hiring, and they're going to be good jobs. It's going to help us solve community problems, but in a way that engages the communities in partnership around a vision for the community, around what that infrastructure is. And yes, that includes street. Yes, that includes transportation. That's a big part about what capital construction can help do. And what we will do as an administration, when I'm mayor, is partner with communities around community vision so that there's more of an exchange. And I just want to be clear about one thing, since we're talking about democracy and accountability and civic engagement. It rarely means 100% agreement, right? We know that. Part of the challenge and the opportunity about coming to consensus is to agree to disagree and figure out what we can do together. And my principles as a mayor will always be participation, partnership, but that the metrics are about our people and whether or not they benefit and live a life with dignity. And that's what we'll do when we look at streets.
This is an incredible conversation. I'm not almost sad. I'm definitely sad. I was like almost weepy, but it's definitely sad that we have to end here because, I don't take lightly this kind of access. I encourage all of those who are listening to this to continue to send in questions to the individual candidates, to send questions and your thoughts and concerns to us at Citizens Committee too, because we want to keep this dialogue going. Another public service announcement, we had a conversation in our last Rethink and Rebuild about what we called hyper-local education and trying to figure out ways that community members can create pods, for lack of a better word, safe spaces, healthy spaces, secure spaces, educationally rich spaces that aren't far from where they live, so that folks can be educated. And that is definitely very important with the pandemic, but that is a solution that has legs into the future. Imagine people being able to be educated and to be healthy and to be able to earn a living where they live. I think that is an important vision for our city. That is a little bit of an advertisement because our next Rethink and Rebuild conversation is going to kind of bring that back around. Also wanted to say that we're, again, if nothing else, go to our website, sign up for our mailing list so you get access to all this great information. It popped up in the banner. And wanted to give everyone an opportunity to give their last thoughts as we shut this down. We are going to start backwards. We're going to start with Diane, then to Maya, and then last to Art. And again, I just want to say thank you for all that you guys are bringing. So Diane.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. I appreciate it. So, I'll just say this, the response to the multiple pandemics of 2020, COVID-19, social justice, and the economic pandemic is not to go back to normal or the status quo. I think the time is now for us to really decide if tomorrow is going to be a future for New York City where we all win. I think we've got to have the moral and the political courage to prioritize the poor, to stabilize as many lives as quickly as we can, and to dare to radicalize the systems that require dismantling, not just reform. Because I don't think our system is broken. I think it's actually working exactly as it was designed. You don't reform an inequitable, exclusive system, you transform it. My team calls themselves the team of loving disruptors. It's a little bit of an invocation of MLK, but that's what my administration will be built on. Loving the possibility of what we can become enough to hold our city accountable and living up to the potential of actually being something that we've never been. And to me, that means not going back to normal. It means living up to our aspirations and really becoming the greatest city in the world. That's what my administration will do. That's what I would offer as mayor of New York City. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with all of you today. My apologies. I do have a conflict and have to sort of scoot out, but I really am deeply appreciative of the opportunity to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you, Rasan, and thank you all for being here. Let me just say that we can do more than recover. We can reimagine the city so we can all live here with dignity. That's why I'm running for mayor. And I have to say, and I will quote President Biden from yesterday when he said, "We have a woman vice president. So don't tell me we can't make change." And I say to all of us here in New York City, we can make change with a woman mayor, which we have never had before. And I'm running because I believe deeply in listening, learning, and leading in partnership. And I just want to invite you to be part of that partnership again, whether you endorse me or not, because listening and learning and leading in partnership does not require agreement. It just requires us coming together. So MayaWiley4Mayor.com. Please go to our website, sign up for our People's Assemblies. We have them at least once every 2 weeks, and we would love to learn from you and be in partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Art.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for holding this. I want to thank the staff at Citizens Committee for pulling this together. It's a huge amount of work, so very grateful to your efforts. I'll be very brief. I think that that everyone agrees that we need change. Everyone agrees that we can't go back. I think there's a lot of shared vision here. But how do we actually get to that vision? There's a method and a process for doing it. And that does involve bringing communities together and actually changing the conversation. It's about putting people and communities at the center of the thing that needs to get done and actually making their voices be heard loud and clear and building backwards from that. I've been doing that for my entire career, and I would love to do that for New York City as your next mayor. Now, one of the ways in which democracy, I think, matters, and I feel very strongly about this, is that the leadership needs to feel like they are connected to the people, and people need to feel like they are connected to leadership. So we're doing a couple things. I have open office hours 7 days a week. You can sign up at my website, cheng.nyc. And we are beginning to make our policy positions open source. So we're inviting people to come in and actually participate in that process. And so if you'd like to participate, we would be enthusiastic, and maybe the Citizens Committee would like to join us in that. So thank you all very much for listening. It was a pleasure to be here and be part of the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Art. Again, thanks to Diane and Maya. Thank you to my colleague Paige that is on front screen, and also to all my colleagues on the staff of Citizens Committee that makes this possible. It is the support of our donors that makes this possible. It is the effort of all of the people in community that love New York City, that refuse to let it go, that make this a success. We will not fail. New York will not lose. New York forever is kind of the slogan that some folks are adopting, and I think it's right. We will reflect on where we've been. We're going to reimagine an equitable, sustainable, and thriving New York, and we will work together to rebuild it. Thank you for being part of these conversations. See you soon, and have a great rest of your day.